Okay, in 2010, Matthew Leno, who's a professor of Soviet history at the University of Rochester, published a book called The Kirov Murder in Soviet History. It's 800 pages long. It's published in the Yale University press series called The Annals of Communism, which is a very highly touted and highly respected series. It's 800 pages long, a lot of documents in translation. And I knew this was coming out because I had been reading Leno's stuff all along, And it came out and I read it, and then I read it again, and I ended up reading 4 times in a row because I couldn't believe it. His conclusion was that Leonid Nikolaev, who assassinated Sergei Kirov, the head of the Leningrad Communist Party, on December 1st, 1934, was a lone gunman. And Stalin made use of this assassination to falsely accuse and then execute all kinds of victims. Not only at that time, but also it's the key to the Moscow trials of 36, 37, 38, the famous show trials. The Kirov assassination is a very important aspect of those trials. You read those transcripts, study them carefully. Leno comes to the appropriate conclusion, the only officially tolerated conclusion. Any other conclusion is taboo in respectable Soviet history circles. Comes to the conclusion that Nikolaev was a lone gunman and that Stalin framed everybody else. The reason I read this book over 4 times was I couldn't believe it. He has no evidence whatsoever that this is true. And there's a huge amount of evidence that it's not true. I was shocked, and I shouldn't be shocked by stuff like this because I find it a lot. So I decided I had to set everything else aside, Tukhachevsky and Trotsky and other kinds of stuff, and just research this. And so I ended up writing this book. It took me a couple of years called The Murder of Sergei Kirov. And it turns out that the Kirov assassination is also the key to the Moscow trials of 36, 37, 38, which is fascinating and which lots of people have heard about. They think they're all phony, they think they're all false and that all these people were really innocent and so forth. And it's also the key to the military purges. And at the end I have a couple of chapters about the military purges because that comes up there too. So, and we have lots of evidence now that these generals were guilty, including non-Soviet evidence from outside the Soviet Union. So it turned out to be even more important than I thought. You never quite know where something's going to go when you get into it, right? You don't know what path it's going to take. And so it's fascinating, and I think it's important, more important even than the Kirov murder itself, which itself is been. But by the way, just one last thing about the Kirov murder. Nikolaev, the man who shot Kirov on December 1st, 1934 in the Smolny Institute in Leningrad, his plan was to kill himself right afterwards. He was what they call in Russia a smyetnik, which means somebody who's going to kill him as a suicide, not a bomber, but a shooter here, right? He was going to kill Kirov with one bullet, kill himself with the other bullet. He had false diaries planted in his house. It was going to be, and he was going to completely obscure the trail to the real conspiracy. But he screwed up. He was so nervous that he shot at his head, and all he did was glance against his head, and he fainted. So he was put under interrogation. Okay? And he didn't have a cover story. He wasn't supposed to be here. So he started going, blah, 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 blah. What am I going to say? And he started to talk. He started to make up one story after another. First of all, it was a whole bunch of different stories. And secondly, none of them made any sense. So pretty soon, the interrogators managed to get to the point where he was contradicting himself, and the truth started to come out. And that's what investigators do. They keep you talking. He was willing to talk. And he talked and talked and talked, and finally the truth started to come out. And that's how they picked up this thread. They did all this detective work. They didn't torture him or any of that kind of stuff. They just kept him talking because he had no backup story. This was not supposed to happen. So it's a fascinating detective story. If you like detective stories, it's a great detective story. Like the Katyn, I have a page on the Katyn murder, the whole Katyn massacre issue, which I call kind of irreverently the Katyn Forest whodunit. It's like fascinating. On top of the importance, whatever importance that they have, it's just fascinating to me, this stuff, because you discover that we've been lied to all our lives.